It is becoming increasingly clear that peace by fear has no higher or more enduring quality than peace by the sword. There can be no peace if the reign of law is to be replaced by a recurrent sanctification of sheer force. Ours has been a story of vigorous challenge, which has been accepted and overcome, challenges of uncharted seas, of wild forests and desert plains, of raging floods and withering droughts, of foreign tyrants and domestic strife, of staggering problems. Today, in the face of this newest and greatest challenge of them all, we Americans have cleared our decks and taken our battle station.
We were always between the troop ships and the islands. Some you bombarded just for harassment and make sure the supply ships didn't get to the Japanese, and then the others were actually invasions where they landed the troops. I was on a 20mm machine gun. Out of Okinawa. They were desperate then. I think that the planes would just actually dive into your ship. I mean, they were kamikaze. They were going to go try to bomb you. I think there was 6 or 7 planes that come in at one time. 8 planes. We shot down 7 in 4 minutes. But the last one came in so low over the water, and the guns couldn't depress. Put up a barrage of shrapnel, and the plane hit that, it disintegrated, but the bomb skipped across the water and it hit us in the side.
John Phillipich was born January 9, 1924, and grew up in Springfield, Illinois. He went through grade school and high school while eventually working on a produce farm.
When I was in high school, 2 of my friends, they were a year older than I was and a grade higher than I was, joined in the Navy, and I kept trying to go with them, but my parents wouldn't sign.
I know that I speak for the mass of the American people when I say that we reject the turtle policy and will continue increasingly the policy of carrying the war to the enemy in distant lands and distant waters as far as possible away from our own home grounds.
So finally my junior year, I convinced them to let me go, and I went in there.
From Berlin and Tokyo and Rome, we have been described as a nation of weaklings, playboys, who would hire British soldiers or Russian soldiers or Chinese soldiers to do our fighting for us. Let them repeat that now. Let them tell that to General MacArthur and his men. Let them tell that to the sailors who today are hitting hard in the far waters of the Pacific.
That was 1942, and quite an experience, really.
Hostility in Europe made the U.S. increasingly aware of the war. Although maintaining the position of neutrality held by Congress, the U.S. was becoming gradually more involved in the conflict. U.S. support of China, along with isolated attacks on U.S. ships, fostered tension for years before the attack on Pearl Harbor and the subsequent declaration of war. In May 1940, the president finally realized that it was probably a question of when, not if, the United States would be drawn into war. The question was answered on a clear December day in Hawaii. A Japanese strike force of 6 carriers struck the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. The attack began before Japanese diplomats informed the U.S. that peace talks had ceased. By 10 o'clock, the fleet as a striking force was wrecked. 6 of the 8 battleships present were sunk or badly damaged. 3 destroyers in dry dock were torn by bombs, and 3 cruisers were damaged. There was one bright spot, however, as all 3 aircraft carriers were elsewhere during the attack. Some 2,400 men had died, and almost half as many were wounded. With the Japanese attack, the war became a world war. Although many Americans did not fully understand the attack, it launched the U.S. into World War II. Before the following week was over, nations representing half the world's population were involved in the conflict. Before and following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese acquired many islands in the Pacific Ocean that the U.S. would plan to take back. One main part of this plan was to increase the power of the Navy, and so shipbuilding increased dramatically. From January 1st, 1942 to the end of the war, American shipyards produced 6,500 naval vessels and a total of 28 million gross tons. John's ship was called into action in the Pacific after the attack at Pearl Harbor.
It was USS Idaho, and I was in the 7th Division on a 20-millimeter machine gun. And to say that we were stationed anywhere, it was all in the South Pacific. We actually started in the Aleutian Islands for Attu and Kiska. And we were there a couple of months and had never left on the ship all the time. I mean, you didn't get ashore. And when it was, the islands were secured, and skipper said, well, we're going back to the States. Why, we'll go to ADAC and let you get your feet on the ground for a little bit, for a day or two, you know, which we did at the naval base. Went ashore. The 2 fellows from Auburn that I met that said they were going to pharmacy school were in there in the chow hall. We had chow together. That's where they spent their entire war, I think. We came home to Seattle again, to Bremerton, Washington Yard, and then we got a 30-day leave. And we had 5-inch 25 open mount guns, and they replaced them with 5-inch 38s. They took the old guns off and put 5-inch 38s on there. About 2 months or something like that, and then we started out and went down to Pearl Harbor. stopped Long Beach, San Francisco, and finally in Pearl Harbor. And every day we'd go out, practice shooting, then come back in to the harbor at night, and basically we were waiting for some more ships to gather there to be able to go to the South Pacific. That ship had, I'll tell you what, it was 624 foot long, 109 foot wide, weighed 33,000 tons, had 12 14-inch guns, 5 mounts of 5-inch 38s, 10 quad mounts of 40 millimeter, and 43 20 millimeter guns on there. It was nothing but guns on top side. The ship they installed what they called a blister on it that was at the water line, and an armor plate was 1 inch thick, 30 inches out, and it went around the keel and compartmentized to make it in the event of a torpedo or something like that would hit it, it would blow those compartments out instead of the armor plate. And then a fellow that I went to school with had wrote to my mother, or his mother, and the two mothers got together, and he was on a sub chaser, a smaller craft, and he wrote a letter to me that he saw my ship go in and out every day. So I went over to the sub chaser base and looked him up, and we went and had liberty there together. I often think about the crew and all of us together, and we had a skipper that he was tough, but you didn't appreciate it till after it was all over with, because we had general quarters all hours of the day and night, whether there was any action or not, it didn't make any difference. He'd pull general quarters just to get you going. Each gun mount had a radio, had a communication with the conning tower and report in, and he would check the time limits that it took, But it got to the point that you had so much experience with those general quarter times that when the action actually happened, it didn't bother you at all. I mean, you just did what you were supposed to do. You didn't get scared or nothing. You didn't think about it, You'd see the planes and shoot. That was that simple. To me, I think it blended the life of everybody together. I mean, I remember the son of a mayor of San Francisco was on our crew. It didn't make any difference. All walks of life, you just blended together. If you didn't, why, they saw to it that you did. I had one experience with the bunks. Were on the side, started low, and about that much space in between each one. And what they did, they were hooked onto the bulkhead, and the outer side was on chains. Well, they would just fold them up and hook the chain into it, and that would give you more room. One fellow there was from Texas, and apparently came from a well-to-do family, because all he'd ever do is take a shower and throw his dirty clothes over the side. And the fellows that were in his section there noticed what was going on. So you could not, the washrooms, you got a bucket of water. That's all you got for a day, for washing your clothes, taking a bath, and the like. And you had to get permission from the skipper to open the washroom, because there's a multitude of them, throughout the whole ship. They took all of his clothes out of his locker, took him, went into the washroom, soaked all of his clothes, and then gave him a scrub brush bath. He cried at first. Not cried, he laughed at first, and then he cried after he realized what was happening to him, But then I'll tell you what, he was the first guy in the wash line after that. It just changed his attitude. But there was a lot of different things like that happened. we did attack at 2. It was cold and it was foggy all the time, and we had ice buildup. You were breaking the ice off the top side. You could hear the planes that were going out to bomb at Kiska. You could hear the planes going over. You never could see them. You could hear them going, and you could hear them when they were coming back. By the time we got to Kiska, it was too cold. The Japanese left. They don't know. They invaded. The invasion forces went on the ground, but nobody was there. And that's when we terminated that operation there. And like I said, went to ADAC then. But I was glad to get out of that part of the country. You just couldn't get warm. We had foul weather gear and all that, but when you went on watch, boy, you didn't stay out there for 4 hours, I'll tell you that. It was like a 2-hour rotation. That was a good part of the country. They could have let the Japanese had that. Nobody would have cared. But the too close to seminary was too close to ADAC and that part of Alaska. We had an island in the New Hebrides Island called Ifadi. Basically, that was our point of operation. I don't know how they figured it out, but it was a harbor of, it's a small island, but then it was a big harbor in there, but it was all surrounded with coral reef. And they blasted out a section where the ships could go in and out. And then they put these cable nets across that with the tug there to pull them open if the ship was coming in, and close them. That was to keep the submarines out. But the story is that the natives were pretty good. They were pretty intelligent, really, because they had outrigger canoes or outrigger boats that they had made out of trees with the side branch on it, and they had sails. And I asked them, where did you get the sails? Well, before the war, the French ships would tour the islands, trade flour for pineapples, bananas, and things like that. And they made sails out of the flour bags. You could get, for a 10-cent piece, you could get bananas, or they'd get you a coconut. Not 2 nickels, it had to be a 10-cent piece. Well, when we're getting ready for the invasion of Okinawa, we got to go to Australia. It took a week to get there. We were a week in Australia and a week to come back. And by that time, all these other troop ships and whatnot were hitting the island too. Well, the price went up to a 25-cent piece. 2 dimes and a nickel didn't count. It had to be a 25-cent piece, say. So that's the education that went along with it. From then on, it was a number of islands. Some you bombarded just for harassment and make sure the supply ships didn't get to the Japanese. And then the others were actually invasions. Every island that we took over had a place for a landing field. They either had one on there or they made one on it. And that was to try any event that they were in trouble, fuel-wise or battle-wise or anything, they'd have a place to land. Wouldn't just splash in the ocean. That was our basic time for working a way to get to Japan. It was just a place to help. Well, beside taking the troops in the islands, why, that was a basic part of it. But Iwo Jima was the son of a gun. That took a lot of lives. Yeah. island bombardment and troop invasions. And I can tell you that Iwo Jima, when that island came up, the Japanese had planned that war a long time ago because they were really in there. We bombarded, you could not get them out of their tunnels that they had in the island. Matter of fact, we didn't secure the island until the soldiers that went ashore had flamethrowers. And the tanks that came in with flamethrowers, and that in turn sucked the air right out of the tunnels, and they finally gave up with that. That was the basic part of it. Stair step into Japan, really. If there was something unusual, they put it over the headphones that we had, and pass the word around that way. But as far as that, you didn't have no printing presses or no newspaper or nothing like that. It was just word of mouth, so to speak. But the communication between the ships was pretty good. I mean, they let everybody know what they were going to do and what the maneuvers were.
As the war raged on, the Japanese became more and more desperate, and it was evident as the Japanese tactics and fighting mentalities became frenzied to try to halt the Allied advancement. The supremacy of the Japanese Air Force diminished as their supply of highly trained pilots decreased, and the aircraft that earlier controlled the skies was outdone by new Allied technology. But untrained pilots in lower quality planes could do just as much damage when filled with explosives.
That was the worst one of all the invasions that we had outside of Okinawa.
It was in late October 1944 that a dangerous, unconventional attack began, the kamikaze, or divine wind. Manned planes were flown into enemy targets, eventually proving costly to both sides of the attacks. Japanese naval captain Motoharu Okamura declared, "I firmly believe that the only way to swing the war in our favor is to resort to crash-dive attacks with our planes. There will be more than enough volunteers for this chance to save our country." The attacks would soon come to John's ship when they were supporting the attack for the final step to Japan, Okinawa. John had a personal job as a gunner to protect his ship from these dangerous attacks, as his ship was a piece of the major push in the fight against the Japanese and would be a target of the suicide attacks.
The assault landing on Okinawa, 1 April 1945, was unopposed. Following the landing on the Hagushi beach, the troops fanned out to the north and south. On the amphibious flagship, the high command of both the Army and Navy forces looked wonderingly at the rapid advance reported on our operations map. Message after message from the troops ashore reported feeble and disorganized resistance. From the air, our observers reported little evidence of enemy activity. On the sea, our support ships remained stationary without drawing the enemy's heavy fire. For 5 days, the land forces advanced, but on L+5, the 24th Army Corps suddenly found itself entering the occupied systematic defense sectors of the Japanese across the southern section of Okinawa.
For the foot soldier, this was the beginning of the battle for Okinawa. As the 24th Corps commenced to be pinned down, the terrain advantages of the Japanese defense line became immediately evident. Now the troops called for the support of every weapon at their disposal. It was here that they called for the direct support of naval gunfire.
They were desperate then. I think that the planes would just actually dive into your ship. I mean, they were kamikaze. They were going to go try to bomb you. And we got hit at Okinawa with, I think there was 6 or 7 planes that come in at one time. 8 planes. We shot down 7 in 4 minutes. But the last one came in so low over the water, and the guns couldn't depress. So the 5-inch guns shot the projectiles out there with 0 time on them, and they exploded and put up a barrage of shrapnel. And the plane hit that, it disintegrated. But the bomb skipped across the water that hit us in the side, and it blew out 2 sections there. And that's when I said that we flooded 2 on the other side and thought we'd get up. And we got to Guam, and they put us on a dry dock, and I think we were there, well, something like 2 weeks, something like that. And repairs were made and back to Okinawa.
For 80 days and 80 nights, the ships had fired in support of the land forces. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers had stood off a shore only 325 miles from the Japanese homeland to deliver continuous fire for almost 3 months. 650,000 rounds of 5-inch or greater caliber were delivered. 33,000 tons of projectiles fell on the island. The ships had brought to bear over 439 big guns.
I was on a 20-millimeter machine gun. But the ones that I lost my hearing on was the 40 millimeters, because that's 4 barrels, and it was going thrum, thrum, thrum all the time. And one was right up to my behind here on the level. It literally drove you down through the deck all the time, you know. But those are, it's just a part of it.
At Okinawa, naval gunfire proved its ability. From General Buckner, commanding General 10th Army, to Admiral Turner, Commander Task Force 51, came this message. Desire to express my appreciation for splendid support ground operation by support ships. Willingness of ships to close shore, though faced with foul water and enemy guns, permitted more accurate close support and effective deep support. Hard work of crews under trying conditions of long hours at GQ and constant threat of enemy air is especially praiseworthy. Power and accuracy of these ships contributed materially to land success and subsequent minimum loss of life.
Being only 325 miles south of Japan, the taking of Okinawa showed the end of the war was near. Following the death of President Roosevelt, Harry S. Truman was sworn in. He made a difficult decision which ultimately ended the war.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped 1 bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. The Japanese began the war from the air at Pearl Harbor. They have been repaid many-fold.
I don't know, I always admire Harry Truman, President Truman, for dropping the atomic bomb, I think that shortened the life a good bit. It really did.
The dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki forced the surrender of the Japanese on August 14th.
I think we were only one hurricane, and that was a little scary for a while, but it didn't last that long. It seemed like the big swells and everything, that ship was so heavy, it didn't bob like a cork. It just went through them, but that didn't last too long. I only remember one hurricane that we ever came close to. I can't not be critical of the general population of Japan or even Germany. I mean, a lot of people there had to do what they were told or they'd be shot. So you can't blame everybody for everything, And when it was all over with, we were in Tokyo Harbor when MacArthur was on the Missouri and signed the peace treaty with the Japanese. That was hard to believe. There's a picture in there that shows everybody, the band come out, the guys in their shorts up there on the turrets and all that stuff. They're all hooping and hollering and knowing that it was over with. It was great. I mean, it was unbelievable, truthfully, because we thought we'd have to go to Japan all the way. It didn't take very long after that, everybody started home. We continued on through the Panama Canal, up the East Coast. It was all over with. You're bringing memories back to me, you know that?
Growing up, I always had an interest in the military, as a lot of my family had previously served, such as my dad in the Navy and his father in the Navy as well in World War II in Korea. And I never really got to meet my grandfather who served in World War II, as he died when I was about 3 years old. So I always grew up wanting to hear these stories of what really happened. Being in this class really showed me some of that stuff, and understanding the personal side of this, as when I first met John on the phone and I talked to him for the first time other than seeing him in the interview, I understood how great and caring he was, and what it really meant to serve in the military rather than what I thought of before. Initially, I was really scared to join Vet Doc, but after all of the things I've been involved in and the time I've spent working on my documentary, it's really made me realize the impact that this class can have, not only on the community, but really on the veterans as individuals. When I talked to John on the phone, it was really when it became even more personal, from the interview to having a conversation with him and him opening up about how he understands the problems that the Vietnam veterans have gone through, and it really showed me the brotherhood of all veterans and understanding that they were just doing their job, whether they enlisted or whether they were drafted, and showing that they have a deep caring for each other. And I'm just so proud that I've been able to be involved in this class and been bringing these stories out for other people to understand. And I'll never forget the lessons that I've learned, and hopefully the impact of this class will continue to spread and to help more and more veterans.